Hello, this is a talk on intelligence signaling. In this lecture, I'm first going to give you some examples of places that we see this thing that I call intelligence signaling. For example, in this procession of students here and what they're wearing. Second, I'll say a bit about the evolutionary biology of signaling, where signaling is a technical term used to describe, for example, what this male peacock is doing. And also describes all sorts of other interesting things. Third, I think in order to understand how academic communities work, we have to understand intelligence signaling. That's why I'm giving this presentation. And there's lots of things that happen when you have a community based on intelligence signaling. Fourth, I think it's important to make peace with the fact that you are yourself intelligence signaling, but I found that a little bit hard, and I'll say a bit about that and how it's related to the martial arts. And finally, as a sort of epilogue, if you go along with what I'm saying, that I think that scientific progress comes primarily from intelligence signaling, and I think that scientific progress is a good thing, and I want to speed it up. And so I don't necessarily think that intelligence signaling is either good or bad. There's lots of contexts in which it's a bad thing, for example, in what you see in this picture. But you can, there's lots of things I think we can do to improve scientific progress. Okay, so part one, places that we see intelligence signaling. So here are some sitcoms.
Some of the words a little too sophisticated for you.
It doesn't make any sense.
Well, of course it does. It's smart. I used a thesaurus.
On every word?
Yep.
What was this sentence originally?
Oh, they are warm, nice people with big hearts.
And that became, they're humid, prepossessing Homo sapiens with full-sized aortic pumps.
Not terribly funny joke there, but yeah, I'm sure everybody can relate to this. I'm sure we've all been in a situation where you see somebody trying to make themselves look more intelligent than they actually are by using lots of jargon in a situation where the jargon really does not actually add anything to what they're saying, which is the general purpose of words.
Say a stranger asks you for directions. Now, you don't know where it is, but do you say that? No. You say, go down 3 blocks, make a left, you can't miss it.
Yeah, I got plenty of dudes out there still looking for places.
Yeah, so this is another sort of form of bluffing. I've never done that myself, but something that I have to admit I realized later on that I had done, which is like somebody said a word that I didn't understand, and they said, oh, do you know what that means? And I said, oh, it rings a bell, and I kind of felt like it did, but later on I was like, no, that didn't ring a bell. I was just saying that. Okay, here's another pair of examples. Hopefully a lot of people will find relatable. So, books. What are the purpose of books? Well, you might think that the purpose of books is to read them. But everybody knows that to some extent, some books at least, are there in order to sort of at least show that you have an aspiration to read them, or being a bit more cynical, having the book is a way of pretending that you've read it, or pretending that you read it cover to cover and understood it, when really you just skimmed it or something like this. Another example is very similar to this is if you go to like public lectures or anything like this, you have audience questions, and audience questions, a friend of mine who works to organize these kinds of lectures sort of said audience questions are mostly about making points. Like their questions do not end with question marks. Yeah, so mostly when people stand up to ask a question, their goal is to show everybody how much they know about the issue. But here's a good example of intelligence signaling. I'd say unambiguously good. So places like Stack Overflow or Wikipedia, lots of other things like this, you've got lots of people helping internet strangers with technical questions. And it's really wonderful that that happens. And I've been in a few conversations where people have said, why do they do it? Why are people so sort of generous with their time? And I'd say that there is a pretty clear answer to that question. It's because to be the kind of person who can answer questions on Stack Overflow about quantum mechanics or theoretical computer science, whatever it is, you have to be very intelligent, and it's a good way of proving that you're intelligent. So you get a rush from that. And here's another thing that I'd say proves that there's some good sides to intelligence signaling. So this is a story about Isaac Newton. It's him talking to Edmund Halley. The story is that Halley had come to see Newton, and they were talking about the theory that Newton was developing. And Halley said, "So do you happen to know what or sort of path would be made by a massive body under the influence of an inverse square force like the one that you're proposing?" And Newton said, "Oh, that's an ellipse. I proved that sort of oval shape." And Edmund Halley said, "Wow, that's amazing, because we know that planets orbit like that. Wow, have you got, what's the proof?" And Newton said, "Okay, sorry, let me just check my desk." And he searches his desk and says, "No, sorry, I can't find it right now, but I'll have it with you in the morning." And Edmund Halley sort of says, "Oh, no problem. Talk to you later." And we now know that, like, there's various versions of this story, but it was something. So when Newton said that, he had not proven it. He was pretending to have proved it. He was maybe confident that he could prove it, but by some accounts, he then stayed up all night trying to prove it. And some people would say succeeded, some people say didn't succeed. Now we know that it is actually true. So Newton was right, but he didn't have proof on this occasion. And if Isaac Newton, who I would say is the greatest scientist of all time, is guilty of this kind of thing sometimes, then I'd say there's no help for the rest of us. So, a bigger example of intelligence signaling in general is education. Education has other purposes as well, other than intelligence signaling, but when people hang their degrees on their wall, or they put on academic dress and walk around a town, or when they put their educational qualifications on their CV, they are showing off how intelligent they are. Again, they are doing other things with their education, but it's surely a factor. Engineers sometimes use this term rubber ducking, which is it's been noticed that sometimes you have a problem and it's really hard to solve. It's really hard to solve the problem. You spend hours on it, you can't find a solution, and then you go up to somebody else to try and get help from them, and this person says, "Oh, okay, what's the problem?" And you start explaining your problem to them. But in the course of explaining your problem, you realize the solution. Even though you just spent 3 hours trying to find a solution, in the 3 minutes that you're talking about this, you find the answer. And that happens more often than you would expect. And so some companies genuinely did institute a policy of having a rubber duck, and or you can buy one yourself, and you explain, when you have a problem that you can't solve, you explain the problem to your rubber duck and see if you actually realize it there. And what I'd say is happening as an explanation of this phenomenon is that when you try to explain a problem, the part of your brain that's like, "Oh, time to show this person or this rubber duck, or this, as in this simulated person, how intelligent you are," that part of your brain suddenly kicks in and you get the extra rush or adrenaline that you need. Okay, and here's an example that I don't know, this will be familiar to some people, less familiar to others, but this quote I've got up here comes from this guy, Razib Khan, a geneticist. And Razib Khan has said in a podcast, "If you're getting Wikipedia out, that's fine. This is how science works. One of the dirty little secrets of science is that people go to seminars and they have no idea what the speaker is saying, and they have to fake it. And at least from my personal experience, I've never been a professor or anything, but I did do a PhD, and I've been to lots of scientific conferences. And it's definitely the case that most of the, certainly the vast majority of a general talk, they do not understand. They certainly don't understand all of the talk, and they possibly understand a tiny amount of it. And they nod and smile and kind of sort of pretend. At the same time, everybody sort of knows that people do that to some extent. But yeah, somehow, well, we know that scientific progress does come from these communities, in spite of the fact that this is happening a lot. It's strange, because ostensibly the purpose of a talk is to just communicate things to people. One thing to say at this stage is that it might be a little bit like the fact that I've seen it said that it's like the fact that in order to exercise in a way that actually improves your muscles, you have to work at the limits of your abilities. So going to talks like this is a real test of you. If you only ever go to talks that you fully understand, in a sense, you learn nothing from it. Well, I don't know, but this is something I've heard people say. Okay, part 2, though. The evolutionary biology of signaling. And I'd say that this is a really important thing. It's only recently become a big part of, well, semi-recently become a big part of biology, but it's still not known a lot to the public. So if you're very familiar with it, you can certainly skip this section, but I'll go through some of the examples that I really like. Okay, so a lot of animals do this. It's not just humans. And here's a nice example. So this is called stotting. Yeah, so lots of creatures related to this one do that. Why do they do it? It looks fun. It looks quite fun, but to say they do it because it's fun just kicks the can down the road. You really need to say, why do they find it fun? And the answer is, imagine that you are a lion watching this happen. And one thing that happens that they even do is they'll stot while a lion is chasing them, even though it slows them down a little bit in comparison with how fast they'd be fleeing from the lion if they didn't stot. The reason that they do this is to prove that they are really good at running. If you're good at stotting, then you're really good at running. And if you are running and stotting as well a little bit, you're kind of saying to a lion that might be chasing you or thinking about chasing you, you're saying, I am so good at running that while you chase me, I'm gonna do things to slow myself down. So, like, you really, really shouldn't even bother, like, freaking me out by chasing me. Go and chase one of the impalas that isn't stotting. They're probably worse at running, and that is useful information to the lion. It's important to say at this stage that it's an honest signal, because impalas that are bad at running, for example, if they've got a sprained ankle, they really won't be able to stot. And so, yeah, and the signal only is convincing to the lion because that is the case. There's lots of other very interesting examples of this. For example, peacock's tails. So Darwin was really freaked out by what on earth is going on with the peacock's tail, because we know that it slows the males down, but the females are attracted to it. And okay, it's really beautiful, but why would a female be attracted to something that is going to slow this male down and presumably slow down any male children that he has? Another good, interesting example is the fish. So this big sand formation here was made by a small male fish, and you can just kind of see the tiny fish there, and it makes that fish an easy target for predators. Why on earth would they do that? Well, in both these cases, this is a male saying, "Look, I am so good at running away from things. I am so fit that I can afford to like screw myself over a little bit, and I can still survive in this situation." And that becomes a very that is an honest way of proving that you are very good at fleeing predators or finding food. What we have here are two more very sophisticated examples. I don't have time to go into them, but this is a bird that altruistically feeds other birds as a way of showing how good it is at finding food. And then this is a very interesting experiment which kind of shows that certainly these monkeys have a sense of justice. So you give them food and you are purposefully unfair with it. But if you do that, then they'll get angry at you. If you give the one on the left some lettuce and the other one, the one on the right, some grapes, which they both massively prefer grapes. The one that you've given grapes to will throw the grapes back in your face, as a way of saying to this friend it's got, like, no, I'm not going to let them treat me like this. I want equal treatment for both of them. So the throwing away of the grape, even though the grape is a nice thing and a very nutritious thing for them, it's a very good way of proving how that you're a good friend, for example. This happens in humans as well. There's lots and lots and lots of examples that I could go for in doing this, but I'll keep it to some simple ones. So, white tablecloths. Why do people have white tablecloths? In a sense, a white tablecloth is a terrible thing to have, because white tablecloths show off stains. Surely it's easier to have a non-white tablecloth, but no. Remember your costly signalling thing. A white tablecloth is an excellent thing to have, precisely because it's so hard to keep it clean. A white tablecloth is a way of proving to others how that you are so clean and that you are so conscientious that you can have a white tablecloth and they won't see a single stain. Another big example is super expensive watches. This is a very credible signal of wealth. Some of these watches run into 10,000, 20,000. I've seen 80,000 pounds. I don't know how high they go, and I don't want to know. You can only get such a watch if you really do have lots and lots of money to burn. One last example here. So this is Mount Everest. Some people are like, oh, why climb Mount Everest? It's some mysterious drive that humans have. No. People climb Mount Everest for a very well understood reason now. It's because it's a credible signal of athletic ability. Another thing from biology that's important to understand in this context is hierarchy, or rather social hierarchy, when you have groups of animals. Not all animals, not all creatures require other members of the same species in order to live. Ones that do often have some kind of hierarchy. In the case of these chickens, it is quite famously established with violence. They will often, peck each other to the point of serious ill health. As a way of, establishing I am more dominant than you, and they eventually figure out exactly where everybody sits in the social stratum in the pecking order. But maybe you want sometimes a way of establishing social hierarchy without potential risks, so without violence. And one way of doing that is playing games, recreation, having fun. So, for example, these dogs here are playing. This is a pose that they're going into that shows that they do not wish each other any harm. That they don't have the intention of actually harming each other. They're both saying that to one another. They're just playing, and they're gonna chase each other to figure out, who should go on top in some sense. Here's a very strange and subtle feature of play, though. So skills like being able to run really fast or be good at hanging from things, if your skills are too useful, that can be bad. Let's see some examples of this.
They spend most of their time perfecting their dance performances. The alpha male is supported by junior dancers. Together, they practice almost every day. Finding the right style to impress isn't easy at first. Too much? Maybe something a bit more gentle? When the lead male has found his groove, they're ready to perform their dance to a female. There's a strict hierarchy among the mannequins, and the alpha male is often the oldest bird. Only he has a chance of mating. The others are just wingmen. So why do they dance when they have no prospect of mating? They don't actually have a choice. A female won't mate with a lone dancer. So every male must join a group and wait his turn.
Yeah, so why are the females attracted to these dances? Well, the dances are a credible signal that the male birds have enough time to be practicing the dance. As in, they have no difficulty finding food and staying healthy, and so they've got time to do this. Here's an example in a more sophisticated animal, and it seems very clear to me that this is an example of art, for what that's worth. Just going to play that again. So the first one has made a ring, the second one blows along a second ring, and the third dolphin separates off a bit from this ring, from this larger ring that they've made. It's really not obvious how the skill of crafting bubble rings is helpful for these dolphins in getting anything done. So to hammer it home, these skills are purposefully useless, because if you only spend your time on developing useful skills like hunting, that's kind of, well, it's not so good at showing that you've spent time practicing these kind of weird group activities. And fairly clear connection to what humans do here. Humans very frequently play with one another. This is sort of what does it mean to play? It means to do something that is useless in some to your survival at least. And we play in a way that develops impressive skills, often with a sort of standardized definition of impressiveness. So in the case of this figure skater here, there's a rigorous standard that this skater is trying to meet. This group activity, of course, you've set down some rules, and you've got to show that you're really good at playing within those rules. More or less the same thing going on with music. Those all happen with communities, and another thing that happens in communities is science. And I'd say that in order to understand how a community works, music, football, figure skating, science, you have to understand how people are signaling within it. Science, I'd say, is about intelligence signaling. First, we've got to talk a bit about this community thing. So, a deep question with human beings is, why did our brains get so big so fast? And by fast, I mean over the several millions of years that we have been separate from all other species, for example, chimpanzees and bonobos, our brains have gotten very, very big. So here's a gorilla and here's a chimpanzee. And there is a human skull, and it's huge in comparison with, our body size. Our brains are so big that we put a lot of strain on the pelvises of the people who give birth to us. We are even in a sense born slightly premature, because our mother's bodies have to get us out of there. So that what this tells you is that whatever has happened over the last however many millions of years, we have had some kind of huge pressure. We need to have had an extremely good reason to get brains this big, because it's so difficult to develop them. And in my opinion, at least, the best explanation for this comes from the social brain theory. The claim is that our human survival and reproduction depends on us humans fitting into our social groups, which involves complex loyalties and politics. So you've got a caveman, and the claim is that if he's ostracized by his social group, well, he's probably going to die. He's probably not going to get any food. He might be able to get food, but will he be popular enough within that group to reproduce? Because he'll only pass down his genes if he manages to reproduce with somebody. Same with a woman. If you think back to high school, maybe, like, imagine, what I mean politics and loyalty in a very general way. So imagine looking at a given high school, and imagine, talking to one student from that high school long enough to understand all of the answers to the questions, why does this person like that person or dislike the other person? Very, very complicated. And the claim is that keeping track of all of those loyalties, it's so complicated that it required our brains to get this big. And the general claim I'm making here is that aesthetic, spiritual, philosophical achievements, which are found across many, many cultures, they are an example of these things that are deliberately useless. So, so this is actually a Buddhist monk defending his PhD thesis in Buddhist philosophy. I'd say that this is very directly comparable to everything that happens in science or whatever else you like in academia today. And ultimately, they are doing the same thing as this dolphin here is doing when it plays with bubble rings. It's saying, I've got brain power to spare. I am so intelligent. My brain is so powerful that I can spend time on deliberately useless things. Now, I've used Einstein as an example here. Of course, science is sometimes useful. In fact, many people would say, if science wasn't occasionally useful, we should stop doing it. It's not like Buddhist philosophy. Well, the reality is that if you look at people like Einstein, they are really Einstein's theory of general relativity, yes, it has been useful in making, for example, GPS, but that's not the reason that Albert Einstein was interested in it and developed it. One thing that people like Einstein will say is, when asked, why do you do what you do, or when talking about their subject area, they'll say, they love their subject area, they find it so deep and beautiful. There's a famous quote here from Bertrand Russell: "Mathematics, rightly viewed, possesses not only truth, but supreme beauty, a beauty cold and austere, like that of sculpture." Another Einstein here. Don't need to. You get the picture. Of course, scientists, many of them get aesthetic pleasure from their subject area. But what exactly is their motive when they say stuff like that? And what really is their motive when they do their stuff? I mean, yes, you can say you like it, but actually that just, again, kicks the can down the road. You need to say why a human would find that enjoyable rather than some other thing. And what I'd say, when I love Bertrand Russell and I love Albert Einstein, but when they say these kinds of things, what they're really doing is they're saying something about themselves. They are saying, I am the kind of person who will do maths for fun. I'm just that intelligent. And I'm not saying that they're liars or that they're wrong. They really do find those things beautiful. I get aesthetic pleasure from my subject area as well, from mathematics. But yeah, that's what the purpose of saying this kind of thing is. It's to fit into this social structure and to show you've got brain power to spare. If you maybe are still skeptical of this, one thing I'd like to point out is that it's frequently, these things that we find inspiring, they often allow us to dominate other people. Like, look out for that. So here's a example from a poem that I really do like, but a little bit of context, sorry. So this is a guy who's at a dinner party and he's shouting at a person who has rubbed him the wrong way, and who seems unscientific to him.
Does the idea that there might be knowledge frighten you? Does the idea that one afternoon on Wikipedia might enlighten you frighten you? Does the notion that there might not be a supernatural so blow your hippie noodle that you'd rather just stand in the fog of your inability to Google? Isn't this enough? Just this world? Just this beautiful, complex, wonderfully unfathomable natural world? How does it so fail to hold our attention that we have to diminish it with the invention of cheap, man-made myths and monsters?
Yeah. So when I'd say that every time you show how inspired you are by science, there is to some extent a nod and a wink saying, and therefore I'm much better than all the people who are inspired by unscientific beliefs. And again, that's not to say that this is exactly a bad thing. Fundamental approach in intelligence signaling, I'd say that there's two that I want to highlight. One approach is you take on logical challenges, so puzzles or pure mathematics like chess. This is a board game that's many, many thousands of years old. I'm not sure, but it seems plausible to me that any civilization at some level of sophistication needs to develop some kind of board game. Mathematics as a way for people to compete with a rigorous way of showing that they've got brains rather than brawn. Mathematics is sort of an extension of puzzles and board games. I mean, I love mathematics, but so this is Mariam Mirzakhani describing something that she calls here a meander. And I remember seeing this for the first time and thinking, I'd never heard of a meander before, and I was like, okay, I guess that's something that these mathematicians have decided they're going to be interested in. Mathematics and puzzles are things that you can solve from your armchair, so to speak. You don't need lots of money. You don't need lots of money and resources and that kind of thing. And you can prove to other people in your board game playing, or your mathematics playing, or your puzzle mathematics studying, or your your puzzle solving community that you've spent a long time thinking about the kinds of structures that they've decided are interesting. Another big part of intelligence signaling is proving that you have read many sources that your community considers important. So if you're in a religious community, that means a religious text. Newspapers are a big example of this. You tend to read the newspapers that your community likes, of course, and to remark on, oh, did you see this thing that was in the newspaper the other day? And scientific journals are, of course, the example of this for scientific communities. And on that note, might as well say it here. So these are 3 books about these about the concepts that I've been talking about here that I would strongly recommend if you're interested in this stuff. And I want to hammer home that I'm not a relativist, so to speak. I do believe that some things are correct and some things are incorrect, and that, loosely speaking, science has brought us in the direction of believing correct things rather than incorrect things. Other fields as well, history and philosophy, etc. But I just want to point out that any kind of academic community, so this is a medieval community of theologians, and this is a bunch of physicists, and I would say that I personally have more respect for the physicists in this room. So there's Albert Einstein, and you've got other amazing people in this room, and they've brought us more in the direction of believing more correct things that I consider important. But look at the motivation. Of course I consider those things important because I'm in communities that are influenced by this community. It's always the same. Your motivation is to promote yourself within a community. So to review, when we decide what to do or say, actual correctness and even practicality are not our actual aims. If we are objectively correct, it is mainly a happy accident. At least this applies in an academic community. Our actual aim is to be interesting and to be persuasive, and both of these are defined by our communities. Our communities decide what sources of evidence are acceptable, what kinds of reasoning are acceptable. We often say, and we sincerely believe, that we are curious about our subjects for their own sake, that we're interested in space travel or cancer or zoology, whatever else it might be, that we find it cool or that we find it beautiful, and we think that the beauty is the reason that we're doing it, but we are mistaken about our motives when we say this. Beliefs and evidence are only valuable to us insofar as they help us promote ourselves. Okay, part 4, making peace with your own intelligence signaling, because you do it, I do it, everybody does it from time to time. Again, people are still often shocked. They say, no, this can't be true. I'm curious about cool science facts. I don't care about whether they'll improve my social standing in a community. And again, yes and no. Like, yes, you are genuinely curious. And I'm not saying that you are consciously manipulating people when you go around saying that you are curious about things and that you find them cool. At least, probably you're not consciously trying to manipulate people, but you're definitely unconsciously figuring out what to say with the goal of improving your social standing, because why else would we do it? There are things that your community considers cool. There are things that you... And notice that the things that you consider cool are often the things that your community considers cool. Like, isn't that convenient? Yeah, it's yeah. And a bit of advice is that you really should accept this, because everybody else knows that it's true of you. Everybody else, when they see you talking about some cool science, unless they're all caught up in how they're going to show off to you or whatever else it might be, they'll probably think to themselves, oh yeah, there's a person who wants to show how clever they are. And they're right. At the same time, so you scorn the accusation because you don't want to be that guy. There's the cliche of somebody like Sheldon Cooper, for example. You're pretentious, you're boastful, you're trying to dominate people, you're ignoring people's criticism, you're unaware of how arrogant and foolish you look. I mean, look at this. So this is me giving a talk, and this guy, you know, if looks could kill, I would, yeah. Nobody likes that guy. But here's what you can do. Intelligence signaling has its place. So in the martial arts, you don't just, you know, once you've become good at karate or whatever it is, you don't just go up to people in the street and challenge them to a fight, or just like throw a punch in order to start a fight and show how strong you are and how good at karate you are. You seek criticism from peers and a community. You know, you as a martial artist, you challenge people who are also experienced and interested in that martial art. It's a mutually beneficial thing when you fight each other. And if you do that, then you will be better than that guy. You'll be, yeah, making everybody involved happy if you're just careful about it. Of course, then the thing that I want to lead on to is that communities of intelligence signalers have created great things, like these gorgeous Islamic art, breakthroughs in chemistry, computers, going to the moon, etc. And having selfish motives does not diminish these things. It doesn't make them less beautiful, less impressive, less helpful in the end. And in general, like, there's intelligence signaling, and virtue signaling is a term that people throw around as well. Virtue signaling is also a big phenomenon explaining lots of human behavior. And I'd say that, in a sense, intelligence signalers beat virtue signalers at their own game. They often create things that help people a lot. And when you're intelligence signaling, you're often, you're better at addressing the elephant in the room sometimes. You don't mind saying something that people will be annoyed at you for saying, but they'll be like, oh, but that guy was right. Whereas if you're virtue signaling, you might be more careful about what you say. Of course, it is a bit circular for me to say intelligence signaling is good because look at how intelligent these things are. But, you know, what do you expect? So, here's a story that I like. This is from Scott Aaronson. In my opinion, Scott Aaronson is one of the greatest scientists in the world right now. And he was once discussing with fellow grad students who they would have been if they were born in a pre-industrial society. Would we have been farmers and bricklayers like pretty much everyone else, or would we have been kings and duchesses? Perhaps we would use the interest that we now have in theoretical computer science to develop a field ploughing algorithm that would have been better and thereby help our communities. And Aaronson said, no, I wouldn't have been that. I would have tried and hopefully I would have succeeded in becoming the chief rabbi of my shtetl. All day long I'd debate questions like how much restitution you'd have to pay if your ox gored your neighbour's sheep. And what he's doing by saying this is that he is in a long tradition of navel gazers. who don't really seek to do useful things. They seek to show each other how intelligent they are. So, you know, you might be accused of intelligence signaling at some point in your life, and I might be accused of intelligence signaling in the comments under this video. But, you know, if that happens, you should just say, yeah, I'm intelligence signaling, whatever. It's a noble tradition. And newsflash, you are intelligence signaling too. You know, what do you think archaeology and history and philosophy of mind and maths and marine biology and space travel, what do you think they're about? Maybe parts of them are about virtue signaling, like medicine. But yeah, who cares? Like, I don't care whether what you think is intelligence, whether you think what I said is intelligence signaling. All I care about is whether you think it is interesting and persuasive. And still epilogue. Just a set of remarks. Like, if you agree with me that progress primarily comes from intelligence signaling, how do we speed it up? What can we learn about? What can we understand about about scientific communities from knowing this? Well, I think we can learn a lot about imposter syndrome, for one thing, which is something that people talk about a lot right now, with good reason. So what is imposter syndrome? Like, sometimes, you know, you've got a question, but like, oh, I'm really stupid in asking this question. I really should understand what that dude said. But, you know, really what's happening is, like, the reason you have imposter syndrome is that you're surrounded by imposters, but they're just better at faking it than you are, to a large extent. You know, not entirely. So there are real imposters, and of course there are real super intelligent people who do know loads and loads of things, and, you know, a lot of the time people aren't bullshitting, but some of the time they are. Yeah, and everybody needs to have this explained to them. Very few people understand things the real first time that they encounter them. They have to practice and get experience with them. That's just the way it is, and it's okay to spend a long time to understand something. So the better thing is if you ask the stupid questions. So Niels Bohr famously said of Richard Feynman, he really liked Feynman because Feynman asked all the questions that nobody else was asking, even though Feynman, you know, he always felt really nervous around Niels Bohr. You know, sometimes it's a good idea to, you know, be submissive and to sort of say, oh yeah, I'm really sorry, I'm sure you already explained this and I should have understood this part, but, you know, could you just explain to me again how that thing works? But yeah, you know, it's a balance. Here's a guy, this is John von Neumann, one of the greatest mathematicians of the last century, probably one of the greatest mathematicians of all time. And he once said, in mathematics, you don't understand things, you just get used to them. I don't know whether he was talking about imposter syndrome, but he might as well have been. You know, if this guy says that you don't really understand things in mathematics, then you can believe it, because he understood more mathematics than anybody. So just ploughing ahead, even though you don't feel that you have as good of an understanding as everybody else, is probably your best option. This is a wonderful Richard Feynman thing that I'll let him speak. I'll let him say most of it.
Now I'm going to discuss how we would look for a new law. In general, we look for a new law by the following process. First, we guess it. Then we well, don't laugh, that's really true. Then we compute the consequences of the guess to see what, if this is right, if this law that we guessed is right, we see what it would imply, and then we compare those computation results to nature, or we say compare to experiment or experience, compare it directly with observation to see if it works. If it disagrees with experiment, it's wrong. In that simple statement is the key to science. It doesn't make a difference how beautiful your guess is. It doesn't make a difference how smart you are who made the guess or what his name is. If it disagrees with experiment, it's wrong. That's all there is to it. It's therefore not unscientific to take a guess, although many people who are not in science think it is.
Want to draw to attention to the use of the word guess. So he, at the beginning, he kind of spits out the word guess. He's talking about the scientific method.
In general, we look for a new law by the following process. First, we guess it. Then we well, don't laugh. That's the really...
He's kind of pretending to be surprised by their laughter there. He fully planned for them to laugh because they were expecting that the scientific process is some deep philosophical or at least very sophisticated, complicated thing. But he says, no, we guess it. It's a guess. Yeah. So he's acknowledging that people don't expect it to be a guess. But it always is a guess. A complicated scientific hypothesis that you can have, a complicated model, can be objectively a really impressive thing. But yeah, Feynman is great for this, for deflating impressive people by saying, right, but that's your guess. You may be correct, but until we have results, it's just a guess. So in science, there is an incentive for overcomplicated argumentation. And this is well illustrated by this nice picture. So this guy he's tried to build a machine that dabs his lip when he's got a little bit of soup on it. And it's clearly an overcomplicated machine. That's the point of the cartoon. But this really, really does happen in science. There are lots of things that we could be doing very simply, but because we are incentivized to make things complicated, we do make things complicated. I'm not a theoretical physicist, but the claim has been made, certainly, that this is what has happened with the whole string theory community, that it's happened in economics. I would also, I certainly feel that this has happened in computer science, which is my field. Another thing that I'm personally interested in, just as a small remark, so Clifford algebra is an attempt to simplify a lot of the mathematics that we need to do for computer graphics, and for lots of other areas of applied mathematics. And I'd say that the reason it's not that successful is that it's too simple. Like, serious mathematicians sort of don't like hearing about applied Clifford algebra because they say, why would I be interested in this? You're just taking results that we already know about and expressing them differently, and never mind that it's simpler. I mean, yeah, anyway. The Nobel Prize and other prizes exist for a very good reason. It's very important to have stuff like the Nobel Prize. This is Richard Feynman collecting his Nobel Prize, and he was one of these people who sort of complained about it, like, oh, I don't need a Nobel Prize, but, you know, of course they want a Nobel Prize. Richard Feynman apparently carried a tape recorder around with him towards the end of his life, in case he said anything intelligent. He as much as any other scientist loved showing off, of course. The Nobel Prize focuses on empirically confirmed results, and I'd say that's for a very good reason. It doesn't get very theoretical. So this is a picture of Ed Witten, one of the world's most famous living theoretical physicists, holding his Fields Medal. He doesn't have a Nobel Prize, and because he is a spectacular mathematician, and he probably fully deserves that Fields Medal, but mathematics is different to science, and as wonderful as theories in theoretical physics may be, yes, it's very good to focus on these empirically conferred results, at least for the Nobel Prize. Otherwise, friends of mine would say a field can go up its own arse, searching for interesting theories. So, you should also expect, given that everything is about intelligence signaling, that you will see the whole truth best in debate and contest between scientists. Because the reason that scientists are coming up with these ideas and evidence for their ideas is so that they can compete against one another, so that they can have these debates and arguments. Patents, I would say, are not that important for technological progress. They are less important than the community incentives, this need to show off to one another. And ideally, we should construct communities like where people are showing off to one another in a productive way, and that has happened at various times in history, and we have benefited hugely from it. So this is a picture from Xerox PARC, where you had a bunch of complete geniuses who were given a huge amount of time to do whatever the hell they liked, and they ended up making the personal computer. Do not believe anyone who tells you that it was basically made by Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. That did not happen. It was made at Xerox PARC by Alan Kay and Dan Ingalls and lots of other great people that we haven't heard of. This here is John Carmack and Mike Abrash, who worked on Quake together. Big game for computer graphics. And yes, again, showing off. It's very motivating. This is another picture from the Solvay conference. You've got a bunch of great scientists here, Marie Curie, Einstein, Dirac, great people, and all competing against one another to, yes, unlock the secrets of quantum theory. Conferences are also good for this. Don't need patents. Also bear in mind, if you ever are a teacher yourself, when you try to teach people, especially if it's something complicated, know that your own motive when you talk about stuff like this is to show off. You're not... Of course, you hope that the kids learn, but again, that'll be a sort of happy accident. You should only expect to be understandable or any good at teaching with lots and lots of practice and feedback from students. A thing that I think is a positive development for science is more and more information on scientists is going to become available, posting to social media, that kind of thing. We're going to become more relatable, more approachable. Stuff like the CV of failures. This is good. This is a guy who, put it up. The degree programs he did not get into. So this is kind of like Be Real for scientists. Government-funded labs, there's a possibility for them to have to disclose negative results, which will be a positive development if that becomes enforced. Because, yes, this thing where people try and sweep their failures or their models that didn't go anywhere, their hypotheses that they had to give up on under the carpet, it's terrible, and it gives you a bad idea of what's really going on. And as a final thing, if you are interested in how to incentivize science to make it work better in general, I'd say your best bet is replication markets, because yes, we're not. It's just the case that we're not scientists. Whether or not I am a scientist, I would say that scientists, or at least academics, are not individually incentivized to pursue the truth. Replication markets could change that, because you'll get a real incentive to come up with things that do replicate and only pursue those things. Yeah. And that concludes this. I do have a Patreon. Do throw something my way if you feel like it, but feel no obligation. I hope you have found this illuminating.